Hey y'all, Craig. Let the silly season begin. We've passed Labor Day, and now it's a march to the finish line. The election of the President of the United States. Wow, what serious conversations we're all having about policy and the future of the world. Nothing like that. It's nuts. I mean, the stuff that the press wants to put out in front of us for us to consider for the position of the most powerful man in the world, it baffles me. And the stories that are going to be coming out and have been coming out recently, I mean, it's like the National Enquirer, you know? It's ridiculous stuff, and people should demand more, you know, but they don't. And, you know, I guess that's why we're in the shape we're in. You know, people are getting their political insight from comedians and late-night talk show hosts. And, one of the things about being a Trump supporter, and I've said this before, you have to spend so much time defending what the guy did. And I had no interest in doing anything like that at the beginning of this, but it was so weird that, as a Trump supporter and voter, there's like no backup. It's just the allegations just keep coming. Oh, well, look what he did there. It's like no, that's not true. And then when you look into it, if you Google something, it's not true, but you can't find the evidence because everything on Google, especially now, is starting to get shifted to just make Trump look bad any way you can. It's everything. I mean, it's the Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on you name it. Every outlet is run by people who just want Trump out of the way, and that just builds my confidence in what he's doing. Every time I hear one of these people explain to me that, this is the most horrible man that just lies, and I'm like, okay, give me an example of the most egregious lie. And the conversation changes right after that because no one knows. It's like there's this list of who knows how many lies, right? And I remember reading through it. It was like over a year ago. I think I got exposed to this thing. It's like, well, these aren't lies. This is just a bunch of ridiculous stuff, Now, Trump's way of communicating is interesting, to say the least. But watching him after a while, I mean, you figure it out pretty quick. He the stuff he twitters, and it's funny, and I've heard from staff members that he actually isn't the guy walking around posting these things. It's like, I've never seen him with an electronic device in his hand ever. But some staffer guy, hey, go over here and put this out at such and such time. I mean, they think these things through, and of course the idea is to put something outrageous out there that makes the press lose their minds, and they bring this thing up, which they never would have brought up otherwise. And it's always kind of funny watching this stuff unfold. But they're at the point now, of course, where they have to use anonymous sources all the time, and it's like the most recent allegations in the Atlantic. You've got all these people who were there with the president at the time and saying, "No, that not only does that not sound like something he would say, but I've never heard him say anything like that, and I was there." But never mind, because you've got these anonymous sources. It's always the same thing. It's such a waste of time. But it gets everybody in an uproar. And then Trump has to come out with some sort of remark to blow everyone's minds and push the focus back on, what might be important next. Consider how complicated the world is right now and all the changes that we're going through. This whole COVID-19 thing has put just a total rearrangement of the international scene. It's like peace is breaking out in the Middle East, and everyone's mad at China, and it's sort of the virus has like exposed all kinds of things all around the world with how people reacted to it. It's been amazing, really, to watch all this sort of bloom, and yet our press here in the United States is obsessed with all these ridiculous little stories, things that, I mean, my Lord, Trump has been in the press practically my whole life. I remember seeing him when I was, in my 20s anyway. I've never been a big fan of the guy. He's just a kind of a loudmouth guy from Queens, but you can't deny how successful the guy was and has been. He's been out there all along, and he's made a ton of money, and legitimately. People point out, bankruptcies and all this. Hey, he went bankrupt a few times at a time when everyone was going bankrupt, but he's done amazingly well. But if you're a supporter, you know the facts, and if you hate the guy, you know the stories. And none of this is going to change anybody's mind that's a Trump supporter or anti-Trump. We know that. We know that all of this is aimed at the people in the middle that are undecided, and that makes it. It turns this whole thing kind of into a spotlight of what do the different parties consider their voters to be. I would say that, from the evidence, a lot of these newspapers and other social outlets have a really low opinion of us. It's all the way from, you can't have voter IDs because, some people can't get the ID. It's like, that's absurd. Anyone can get an ID. They make it so easy in every single way, and you need them for a million different things. Or, because of COVID, we can't do voting like we've always done it. Well, that's also ridiculous, right? You can... If you don't feel safe going down and voting like you normally would, get an absentee ballot. Fill it out and mail it in. No one's against those. You have to prove you are you. What people are against are these blanket ballots that they just send out to every address where they've ever had somebody vote before, and then see what they get back. I mean, you can see where that could go wrong. I mean, anyone can fill this stuff out. Anyone can grab them. The post office, just recently it was all this, they've told the post office to slow down. They're removing mailboxes and equipment and doing all this stuff to booger up the elections. And then you find out that, the new head of the post office is like, I didn't tell him to do any of this. And, it's the usual shenanigans, right? The post office union supports Biden. And they're all union guys, right? I mean, the postal union's a big deal. Their retirement assets are amazing. Somehow they've negotiated where the post office will be reimbursed for their retirement liabilities, and they don't want to let that go to ruin in any way, shape, or form. Maybe they slowed things down a little bit, to put the fear in everybody. I mean, like so much of this stuff, you got to look into it a little further. It's everything from like George Floyd. It's like, wow, police brutality. Well, that was brutal looking, and then you see what led up to it. It's like, it's more complicated than it appears. And then, the thing that was police brutality gets morphed into racism, and again, that racism and the peaceful protest morphs into riots and looting. We just keep seeing things getting twisted into what they wanted it to be in the first place, which is a lot of disruption. And you got to ask yourself a little bit, who's behind the disruptions, right? And, there's a lot of different groups. I mean, obviously we know that China is spending a lot of money and putting a lot of effort into being as disruptive as possible. It's like their future depends on it. Russia, Iran, but all kinds of actors. We know what they're up to. They've always done this kind of stuff, but they're more sophisticated in doing it now. But then we've got groups inside the country that are doing the same thing. We've got Antifa, which is hilarious. Anti-fascist, and they're nothing but a bunch of fascists, right? I mean, what do fascists do? They by force they stop you from doing what you want. They force you to do what they want you to do. That's a fascist. And look at Antifa. Look at these guys. Grabbing people's drinks and punching old guys and breaking their jaw and destroying downtowns and looting and all this stuff. I mean, and there's other groups too, although I do find it funny when they say, well, it's white supremacists, because we all know that, they're not going to put up with those guys for 1 minute. We saw how Antifa dealt with some guys they felt were white supremacists in Portland, right? No, this whole thing it's a bunch of different groups that are trying to cause all kinds of trouble. And they don't really have a political end. They just want disruption. But there is a group that has a political end, and they're taking advantage of all these disruptions. I couldn't say that they're orchestrating it. I'm not sure. But we see the same people get behind the Democrat Party right now as are getting behind these different organizations. We can see it. We can follow the money, and we can see exactly. And it's all on the left side. Now, I've mentioned this before. Nothing against Democrats, or certainly nothing against liberals. I respect liberals a lot. I'm not crazy about progressives. I feel progressives are just out to basically push us towards socialism, and there's every indication. I mean, you can see it. There's all the proof in the world, and especially right now. Look at the popularity between Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's absolutely a socialist. And then look at the direction that the whole Democrat Party has been pushed into. You see, yeah, sure, there's Joe Biden. He's got this long record of being a moderate. But Joe's just a political animal. I mean, he's just been out there as a face, for whatever cause the Democrats have. Look at Kamala and her voting record. I mean, she's certainly very progressive. And do you see how they have changed their position on so many fundamental? It just, how can you miss it, right? I mean, the Democrat Party has been taken over, by this socialist movement, and so it's no longer where we used to think, well, you kind of hold your nose and you pick your fish. It's, there's no difference between them. Now there's a difference, and the difference isn't, there isn't much difference between Republicans and Democrats, because you've got progressives in both. There's no difference in the White House practically, because it's staffed with people who have been there, for years. And you can't shake them out of there. The government, over 2 million people working for the federal government. There's a lot of them that were placed in there, jammed in there to be position holders for that progressive movement, hoping to get past Trump so they can get back at what they were up to, which was growing the size of government, making people more dependent on the government to make all their decisions, which I guess is the bigger point. Why would you want to place the decision-making on the hands of the government? People overwhelmingly, if you poll people, you ask them just generically, what do you think of Congress? Like, ugh. I mean, they have to rank as some of the lowest. Maybe what's lower, right? Lawyers. And ironically, of course, there's more lawyers than any other profession in politics, right? We all know. I mean, politicians are sleazy. They just are. We know that. And yet, here we are again. It's like, well, we're going to put more responsibility in the hands of these people who we wouldn't trust with a dead ferret. I don't understand the appeal of that. But here we are. We're coming up to an election. And what exactly, are we electing? With Trump, he has a proven track record now. He was new at government, but he became president, and much to a lot of people, certainly my amazement, he became probably the most conservative president we've ever had. He's been very, very effective. Government's done good things. You hear people complain, oh, these deregulations he's gonna poison the water, and we're all gonna, have diseases, and that's not the case. The EPA's done a better job by deregulating them. You're getting them out of the hair business, and you're putting EPA back in the business of doing what they're supposed to do, and they can do it much better when they're not a political operative. Look at the FBI and the CIA. I mean, look how those agencies were just ruined by the leadership. And they were actually allowed, those agencies, to be utilized to spy on their opponent and stuff. I mean, really sleazy stuff that you'd expect out of the third world, not here. Or even look at how Congress acts. It's just it's so different than the way it used to be, and you look at why are they acting so extreme, and it's because they're being threatened. As I said, Trump comes along. He's not a politician. He's very effective. He's pulling the regulations out of government, which means he's taking the power away from a lot of these people who have become very accustomed to having this power. What do we wind up with? Well, a leaner government that's more responsive to the people, less responsive to big government. That's, I think, what we all want. If we're honest with ourselves, big government, what does that ever get you other than, a steeper tax bill? And we need lower tax bills. We need more business. We need encouragement. We need people working hard, and we need to step away from all the shutdown nonsense that we've been stuck in for way too long now, because we really have a big mountain of money we have to pay back. We're 26 trillion plus in debt now. I guess the good news is everyone in the world, every country in the world is in huge debt. No, we don't owe it all to China. Actually, China owes us more than we owe them, and China's never paid a dime on their debt, well over $1 trillion. But we owe them a little over $1 trillion. We owe Japan more than that. A lot of private equity firms and all hold most of the debt. It's spread out all over the place, and that's kind of normal business. But the payments on that debt, that's what's crushing us. And what was that money spent on? Really, if you look at it, it was spent largely to keep unions afloat. Huge numbers like the postal union I mentioned earlier. But remember when Obama bailed out GM? He bailed out the unions. A lot of the businesses that fed GM that weren't union or not strong union, they were stuck out in the cold. This was all about spending a lot of money on union wages and making sure benefits and all that were in line, over and above the needs of the small businesses and the individuals that work there. And make no mistake, that's if Joe Biden were to get in there, unions are everything to Joe. Even if if the party's turned socialist, Joe's going to push for that, if nothing else, because those are the guaranteed votes. Think about it. What do unions do now? Where unions used to be very important. To look after the workers that didn't have representation in the huge businesses of the past. But it's changed. They've served their function to make the environment better for the worker, but then they got more involved in the politics. And what's happened now is that the union creates a situation where they can collect dues, and they collect a lot of dues, and they can use those dues for whatever they deem necessary, and they usually deem electing Democrats as necessary, because Democrats will in turn support the unions. So it's just cyclical. So unions had a lot to do with Obama winning the presidency, and he returned the favor, and he kept them alive. And, that money that we poured in there to help save those unions, the unions turned around and they poured that right back in the Democrat Party. You can find evidence of all this very, very easily. It's amazing. Even a lot of the penalties, like if you got on the wrong side of the EPA, let's say, and you had to pay a penalty, a fine, they would give you options. You could pay that fine to the office of the local government or the EPA, or you could make a donation to any one of a number of funds that would help restore feathers on ducks or whatever great cause it is. But then that organization would then in turn take a lot of that money and donate it back into the Democrat Party. This has been going on for a long time. You can call those all small donations because they've plucked that donation right out of everybody's paycheck. Teachers' unions right now, it's a big deal. Not all states have teachers' unions, but the teachers' union writ large in Washington has huge power. And, they're very against school choice and charter schools and stuff like that, because then they would have to compete, their public schools, their union teachers would have to compete with other schools that don't have the same union loyalties. Unions, one thing they do is they watch out for the people who are members of that union. Once you get in there, you're going to get paid well, you'll have good benefits until they screw up really bad and you lose it all. But more often than not, it works out pretty well for the people who are union members. But of course, it ends up in products that cost much more, and it requires an injection, an infusion of capital from usually, government largesse one way or another. So the teachers union, they've been able to kind of hold back and say, you know what, this whole COVID thing concerns us, and so we're not going back. Unless, and then they've got all their requirements, and some of these requirements, the things that they're demanding, don't have anything to do with education. I understand they don't want the competition, because there's, when you're covering for a teacher that's not all that great, but it's a union member, and maybe they're bringing the school down a little bit, you got to watch out for that teacher, because that's the obligation you've got. Whereas a school that's competing against you that doesn't have unionized teachers, they have a problem teacher, they get rid of that teacher. They need to perform. They have to appeal to the parents to send their kids to that school. They have to generate good results. Whereas the public schools don't have to do that. They can do whatever they want. So as an example right now, they've got as many administrators as they have teachers. Very, very top-heavy organizations, very expensive to run, and still no accountability whatsoever. If you've dealt with schools at all, you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like where we wind up with so many of these big programs. The bigger they are, the less accountability. It's like who's in charge. It's a labyrinth, and good luck figuring it out. And so nobody ends up making decisions. It's a CYA kind of thing, and that's kind of where we're heading towards if we keep supporting big government, big union, big machine. And again, as I said, Trump is out there. He's running things in such a manner as a business would do it. Where, if that doesn't make sense, let's not do it. If that costs too much, let's not do that. The kind of decisions you'd make on your own. So, I keep supporting Trump for that reason. I every time he's accused of something, I'll look into it. And I say, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And it's usually a pretty good reason. I've been very satisfied with what he's done. And I've been very dissatisfied with the big government thing. I've never seen it work for anybody, in the end. And like I said in the beginning, when people generically are asked, what do you think of Congress? What do you think of government? You know, people have a low opinion, and that's a shame because we're the ones paying for it. They work for us. We're their boss. So, you know, this is that time of year where you get to be the boss and you can go down and vote and make your opinions known. So please do that. Make sure everyone you know votes. But vote the appropriate way, you know. Demand that, you know. Demand accountability for those votes. Make sure that there's not somebody gaming you. Because, you know, think of it. You go out and vote, and some other guy's breaking the rules, and he votes by mail, and he goes into the precinct and votes. He's just canceled you out. Twice. Can't tolerate it. It's too important right now. But it's the silly season. So get ready for way too many political commercials and a bunch of crazy news reports that don't make any sense. And beepers telling me, Craig, shut up. So I will. But wanted to get that off my chest real quick. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.